Good evening. Welcome to Buzzwords and Music. I'm here this evening with Randy Hoexter. Randy Hoexter is a pianist, a composer, an arranger, and he's worked with many artists: the Georgia Symphony Jazz, Atlanta Symphony Pops, George Howard, Chuck Rainey, legendary bass player, Sonny Emery, legendary drummer, Jimmy Haslip, legendary bass player. We can go on and on. Dave Weckl, Clay Aiken, Rod Morgenstein, Jimmy Herring, Oteil Burbage, Adam Nitti, Jeff Sipe, New Song, Peter Frampton, Trisha Yearwood, Gladys Knight, Victor Wooten, Mike Stern, Joe Rosenblatt, Scott Henderson. He's written music for clients including Amazon, Bank of America, Arby's, Yamaha Corporation, Univision, Timberland, 615 Music, Jupiter Media, Getty Images, BBM.net, Kohler, Novo, Nordisk, Sun Sports, Fox Sports, Florida, Nippon Television, Japan. I need to see if I've heard anything when I go over there. Randy is also on the faculty of Georgia State University School of Music and LaGrange College. He is former director of education at the Atlanta Institute of Music and Media, and we're label mates on Blue Canoe Records. Though you've probably released more records than I have, but it's it's great to see you.
You too.
It's been quite a while. We haven't really, very rarely have we ever really hung out. I think most of our chat is our snappy repartee back and forth in social media stuff. So it's good to have you here and get to dive into a little bit of this resume.
Sure.
So
Yeah, that was I listened back to that. I'm like, who is that guy?
yeah,
Although,
yeah. It's a mouthful, and I think you were actually the first resume I ever read. Otherwise, we just kind of get into it. But you've covered so much ground. When I first met you, I guess that had to be back in the '80s,
yes, sir.
and we were both keyboard players for different ensembles around town. And you've been the guy that has stuck most with performance and being an artist, whereas I kind of veered off into another direction. And so when I haven't been to a gig, one of your gigs, because you do several trio dates as well, right?
Yeah, I've got a couple trios I do on a regular basis. Yeah, just piano trios. That's probably my favorite way to play.
Yeah, it's the toughest.
But everything is open. Anything you want to play, you can do. Especially if you and your bass player are familiar with each other and in tune. It can just go anywhere, and that's the best
Yeah,
part.
that's the beauty of live. That's if I miss anything about live performance, it's that. For years I had a trio down at Daly's
Oh yeah.
downtown, and Joseph Patrick Moore and Jimmy Jackson were the
Oh yeah. Well, I love Joseph. Obviously we worked together on the recordings, and we played together a bunch. And he's just an incredible musician. And then,
yeah,
of course, Jimmy. I loved him. I miss him. He was very dear to me.
yeah. So so that was probably the most fun I had. It was in
Yeah.
trios.
Well, those two especially. Wow.
Yeah, and then my other rhythm section was Rico Scott and LeBron Scott, aka Porky, both who are no longer with us either. So
Jan Rico was also dear to me. He was a very good friend.
yes,
Went back forever, and I loved him like a brother as well.
yeah.
Good guy.
So how many recordings do you have?
Well, as a leader, I have two records. That's all I have. But I have, well, I also have a Christmas record, which I guess counts. That was the first one I did. We did it
They actually
when I was
absolutely count.
working as a commercial. I was trying to launch my commercial composing entity, whatever it may be, back in, I guess, early '90s. Um, and so I figured I would record some Christmas songs in a sort of in my own personal style, kind of distorted into a modern jazz thing.
Right.
And so my friends and I recorded them. Joe Rita and Chip Lunsford and Brian Lopes and a few other
Oh,
people.
yeah, it's a bunch of
Alfreda
slouches.
Gerald. I'm sorry.
A bunch of slouches.
Exactly. Alfreda Gerald sang a couple of them. Um,
Nice.
and what I was doing was I was trying to have like these Christmas card back then cassettes that I would give to potential clients or current clients to try to just keep my name on their desk. That's how it works in that business.
Yeah.
They call you if they remember your name and if they've heard from you recently. So I made this Christmas album, and then we did some various other iterations of it, but it was a lot of fun. And then later on, I did an album of original jazz tunes, which is called Radiant, and then I a few years ago did the album Fromage, which
Fromage,
is
yes.
on Blue Canoe, a collection of covers of pop songs from the '70s that were considered cheesy, and so
You uncheesed them for sure.
oh, thank you. Well, the objective was that back to the jazz musician profile, career profile, whatever that might be, is that everybody does a standards record. I was listening to Keith Jarrett's Standards 1 and 2 volumes the other day, and everybody does a standards record. And I thought, well, first of all, I don't want to try to compete. I mean, you got Keith Jarrett, you got Bill Evans, all these people playing covers and standards. I thought, well,
Right.
I'll just do songs that nobody would dream of doing, or that they'd be humiliated and embarrassed to do. Just silly
Right.
songs.
And you avoid comparison that way as well.
What's that?
And you avoid comparison as well.
Absolutely, which is part of it. Just try to walk in those shoes, Oscar Peterson.
Yeah,
All that.
right. I
So,
mean,
instead, I'll just be me and do something with a wry, dry humor to it. But then at the same time, put as much possible art in it as I can. Take it seriously and have a good time with it too. So there you go.
yeah, because it's so easy to, as pianists, we all kind of play from the same songbook a lot. The real book and those kind of things. And as many times as those songs have been done, it's very hard sometimes to find your original spin on it.
Right. How many versions of all the things you are can you do? Even though it's
Exactly.
great. I mean, the other alternative would be to just change it so much that nobody can tell what it is.
And
I mean, there's
and,
that.
and I always say that with even with all my artists that if whenever I'm producing and somebody wants to do a cover song, my two words of advice are you better be able to do it better than the original or so different from the original that you avoid comparison. Or else it's just
Absolutely agreed.
or else it's just going to live in the where is it now file.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of like Earth, Wind, and Fire covers, for example, and I'm like, why would you do that?
Yeah.
It's already perfect, first of all, and then really, unless you're going to lose that, and everything that it's great about it is intrinsic to the song. So there's certain songs I think there's just no point in trying to do a cover of them. They are as they are great, and so and in this case, the great thing was that the songs were I don't want to come out wrong, but they were pretty terrible, really. I mean, that was the they were pretty silly, yummy, 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 or something like that.
That's
They're
right,
they're
yeah.
not really serious works of art, so I don't have to worry about that, or they were, just really embarrassingly bad, So at this point, I could just do something, and plus, people could hear them and go, "Oh, yeah, I heard that."
Recognition is a big part of performing. People want to recognize what you're doing,
Yep.
especially when you're picking a cover. I mean, if you pick a cover of something so obscure, it's not really a cover for most people.
Yeah. Yeah, in that case, then it's such an inside joke or whatever inside thing that you've lost everybody. I agree. So yeah, so as far as the standards, as far as doing something like that, I thought it would be kind of fun to do something people would recognize. Is they're not going to recognize my compositions. There's no way they
Right.
could. So this was a fun way to try to bring that in.
And
Make
it
it fun.
introduce actually a valid way to introduce yourself to an audience.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think so.
You know, I know I've picked up albums in my lifetime where I've seen like maybe a popular cover on the record and or a couple and go, well, I want to hear what this guy's interpretation is. And then that leads me to the other works by them and things that I may have missed.
Absolutely. Yeah, because now they're familiar. Instead of the music being familiar, they've become familiar to you. Just like
Exactly.
your favorite movie star you see in a movie and then you're going to seek out another movie with that actor in it. It's the same thing, I think.
The one thing I'm glad of is you remember that little surge in the '90s we had where you would take whatever the big pop song of the day was and you'd play it instrumentally except you'd have the chorus sung like that was going to lend it all the credibility it needed. There was a lot of that
Oh
going on
yeah,
in
yeah.
the
That was
'90s.
the beginning of the smooth jazz
That's
era. They called it a vocal accent, I think, was the term for it, or something similar to that.
really,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah. It just
Saxophone plays the melody, and singers or background singers do the chorus.
yeah, yeah. That just got to be very old quickly. You
Yeah,
know,
pretty much instantly for me. I just thought, well, it's just maybe a bit of pandering.
that and I think sometimes it's a cop out.
Yeah.
You know, just I don't have time to work on a real arrangement of something, so let me just cover this.
That's possible. Well, yeah, I noticed on without being terribly critical of that a lot of some of those arrangements end up just being like intro, saxophone plays melody, saxophone solos, and
Vocals
saxophone plays
happen.
melody or something, or maybe a breakdown for 4 bars and then with saxophone. It's
Yeah,
like from an arranging standpoint, I just didn't really hear enough color. I didn't hear enough thought going into who's playing what. Same with like a guitar, play some West octaves and then go back into the melody.
yeah, and
Yeah.
and talking about from an arranger standpoint, one of the things, I mean, we've all done jam sessions and things like that where you go in and, like you say, you're playing all things you are, and you're pretty much sticking to um, the fake book versions or whatever, because you don't have time to create uh, a new arrangement on the spot. And I used to get I always, I never really got into all right, we're going to play the head. Now the sax player solos, then the piano player solos, and then the trumpet player solos, and then, oh, we got to trade some fours with the drums. And it's just everything turns into that.
Oh,
So,
yeah.
one thing, and you probably get to experience this because you work with a fairly steady rhythm section, correct?
I have I have a handful of people that I work with.
Right. So you can
That I'm familiar
actually
with.
do arrangements of things.
Yeah, I mean, I think that formula for a jazz tune. I mean, obviously, if you're on a gig where you're just calling tunes, you're just playing off the top of your head. You
Right.
can't go too far from that because I mean, nobody's gonna know what you're doing. But I try to throw in as much variety, even as simple as if you play with a saxophone quartet. I notice some players they play the head and then they always go into this solo on the
Right.
sax. Let's not do that. And I listened to Bill Evans trio. The bass player would do the first solo live,
Yes.
or any number of possible things. Even just changing it up in a small way. When we do standards, what we try to do is if we haven't worked out something, which we do on some tunes, we come up with somebody comes up with some riff on the tune.
Right.
And so then the tune sort of morphs into that, and it's an group improvisation on that theme. I like doing that too. So I agree that if you're just going through the motions of the 1959 era
Right.
jazz, which is arguably the greatest
Oh,
year of jazz, no question.
absolutely.
But I
Absolutely.
mean, it's been what 60 some years, so So there are other ways to render a standard, for example. Agreed.
Yes, and we have songs that that come out that have been out in the last 30, anywhere from the 60s until now, that well, Herbie kind of defined it when he did the album The New Standards.
I loved it. Yeah.
Yeah, because
That was one of my references when I did the Fromage album, because I remember him doing that, and I think he did songs that weren't part of the jazz repertoire at all. I mean, Nirvana and stuff like that was on there.
Prince and Steve.
Yeah, and he did them, and they, of course, he put his hands on them, and they were almost, they were legendary already. But yeah, I wanted that same idea, but the idea that I mean, the jazz musicians of the 40s and 50s, they were playing popular songs at the
Exactly.
time. I mean, some of them were composing tunes. I mean, obviously you have original jazz tunes from that era, but you also had a big number of those and they weren't jazz standards back then. They were just pop songs.
They were pop songs, and I always recall not that I'm going to quote it verbatim, but Miles Davis, he took a lot of flack for recording Time After Time, and he said, well, nobody gave me flack when I recorded Someday My Prince Will Come, and that was a big record at that time.
Movie song, yeah.
And sometimes I feel like pure jazz critics hold everybody, like you said, music stopped in 1959, and that's the standard which you're going to be, they're going to judge you on, so to speak.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the natural part of the human condition of society that we tend to very quickly create these landmarks in our culture, and then we hang on to them because the fear of the unknown is so great. In other words, we come up with this jazz is that sound, 1959, whatever, Miles Davis, and so one of the tropes is to use those as a golden age, the myth of the golden age. That's when everything was as it should be. And of course, those who were alive in '59 know it was not the golden age of anything. I mean, there were good things about it, but
Yeah.
there are now. But we create this cultural monolith that then we always refer back to that. And I think that's just natural. What happens all the time, and it takes a little bit of you have to let go of that. So I'm not a fan of the purists. I'm a big fan of the tradition. I love the music of the jazz.
Absolutely.
And I've studied it a lot, and I love to play it. But I also, I'm not gonna. Nobody's gonna get hurt, if we try something else.
Exactly. No children are going to go hungry because
Exactly. And we can come up with new things, and a lot of those things sneak up on us too. Things that we didn't think were going to be a giant cultural moment at the time. Nobody really paid any attention to them, and then decades later, suddenly that's the essence of something. So I don't really know. You can't know what that's going to be. So
yeah, and we mentioned Herbie Hancock earlier. I mean, here's a guy that changed the way we looked at jazz on multiple occasions.
absolutely, and got criticized for it too.
Well,
Got criticized by a lot of people.
Yeah.
I think they were in error. He was, it's like Billy Joel. It's the same thing. He's one of my favorite pop artists, and every time he did something different, everybody gave him a hard time about it. And he just kept trying different things. He was just pursuing his muse. And
yeah, I think when he released that Glass Houses album with
it's kind of a punk rock.
with the You May Be Right and
he wanted to make a rock and roll record, and then he did the one with all the doo wop on it.
right.
And I think it's great. I think he was trying to find something that I sense the legitimacy, whatever, or the authenticity of what he was doing. And the same with Herbie is that he just he found these synthesizers and they're cool, and he started playing them. He found these grooves and he thought they were cool, and he was bold enough to just and he had plus he had the success and a record label that he could do these records, and
Yeah.
so those I just think that those are the pioneers, the people.
Well, and you hit on a great word when you said authenticity, because it doesn't matter to me what genre of music is, but if it's done well and has integrity, it's already going to be on my radar, so to speak. I'm already going to give it more credibility than when you hear somebody that is just following, um, oh, well, this is what's happening now, and
Yeah.
so therefore I'm going to do this. And you can sense that it's, like you had said earlier, almost pandering to a certain audience.
Yeah, and there are different personalities of artists. I mean, and there are some who are by their nature, and I agree with that completely. I think we can tell as experienced musicians which one's going on. Are you just trying to fill in the blanks, or are you doing what you intend? I mean, if you're going to be here, you got one shot at your life. I think you should do what I mean. You should put into the world what it is that you feel should be put into the world. But there are different types. I mean, there's types that are explorers, and there's types that are sort of fine tuners of things. I always like to think about Mozart versus Beethoven. They're both just transcendent geniuses, but Beethoven was a lot more of a disturber of the peace with his ideas.
Yes.
He was much more prone to. Of course, he lived a lot longer, and that has something to do with it too. Getting to be older and going, I don't feel like doing the same thing anymore. But I mean, his music changed everything with a lot of the ideas he had. Where Mozart, of course, part of it is that he was forever young. I mean, he was 35 years old or something.
Yeah.
But the other thing was that he was. I mean, his music was quite a bit more mainstream in my.
Yeah, he would be I always say Paul McCartney is our Mozart of our time.
That's pretty decent.
You know, the master of melody. Um, whereas, like you said, Beethoven, a little more chaos happening.
Oh yeah, and not satisfied with the status quo.
Yes.
Not interested in it. I'm kind of like that. I mean, I certainly have to, having written a lot of pieces for commercial purposes. That's completely the opposite. What I enjoy about that is the anonymity of it. I just do it and have fun doing it. but as a composer, I want to find some crack between everything everybody's done that nobody's explored. What can I do in here? But it's got to be one that sounds good too. So that's tricky.
I've tried that in film. I've done maybe 5 feature films, but I feel like I'm still just I'm barely scratching the surface. But on one particular film, I did a hybrid between orchestral and electronic, and I enjoyed that a lot, combining the different sounds and textures with orchestral stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and it's a legitimate sound. I mean, and more importantly, especially in film, the sound, is, I mean, where it really isn't. It's being heard in that context where it matching or enhancing the action is everything anyway. So, yeah, I'm guessing you probably, if you're like me, no matter how many films you do, you'll still feel like you're scratching the surface.
Exactly.
That's how I feel when I'm trying to. Every time I sit down and write anything, I don't care what it is. The first part is I have no idea what I'm doing at all. What am I doing here?
Well, you may do this as well. A lot of times if I'm writing, I'll just go sit down at the piano and I'll just start stream of conscious playing, and I'll usually record those, and after 5 minutes, most times I bore myself. Sometimes
you got 5 minutes. I got about 30 seconds.
Well, yeah, I'm being kind to myself, but sometimes I'll go back and listen to what I did, a month later, and I might just find that I hit 2 or 3 chords in a row that had a nice feel to it, and go, So I find composing to be, if you wait for inspiration, you're never going to write anything.
Oh, I completely agree. Yeah.
there's so many people that think, well, I have to be inspired to do this. Well, you're not going to accomplish much. It's a craft.
Absolutely, agreed. I've been a teacher a long time, and that's actually one of the things that I say at the beginning is I have a little um, flow chart that I give my students on how the composing process works, and I'm not telling them how it works by telling them here's how you should do it, and
Right.
according to my opinion, I'm telling you this is how it works because nothing else really does. And a lot of that, and with that flow chart is a series of little bubbles or whatever, like speech bubbles, whatever that are point to the various parts of it, pointing out all the sort of detours you can go on that are going to be toxic detours. Like one of them is need to feel inspired, or which means that you're now basing your productivity on your current emotional state, which mine's never been that reliable. I'm going to be in a good mood or I'm not going to be in a good mood. It's something I can really plan. And or that I have to be in one specific, this is great kind of mood to get anything done. And as a matter of fact, I always talk about how when I'm in that mood, this is great. I'm cool. I've got great ideas.
Yeah.
That usually, first of all, doesn't result in any music. I usually have to get up and walk around or go leave the room or something when I feel that excited. And it also doesn't last very long before I'm like, oh, that sucked.
Yeah.
So I rely on technique. Now that doesn't mean that there's not the magic in there, the magic of art. But I find that it's like the old term, the old physics term of the ether, which was that pervades everything. Which I guess there isn't really one, but or in Star Wars we got the Force, it binds everything. And to me, creativity is like that. It's everywhere. It's inside you. It's through everywhere. The creativity. You're not going to really not be creative. You don't have to worry about it. You don't have to try to be creative. What you have to do is just sort of get busy. And the creativity, in other words, if you find something that's a pretty contrived exercise to get yourself writing, I'm going to mess around with this scale, or I'm going to find this interval, or I'm going to do whatever, or this chord, or rhythm, or anything else. If you get going with something as contrived as that, the creativity just seeps in there because it's always there. It's everywhere. And so I don't really have to try to get creativity. I just I mostly the other side of it, of course, is that I have to be able to not block it. In other words, creativity is everywhere, but there's a lot of rational thought that basically blocks that creativity. I find that when I'm composing, if I get into the proper state, time passes really differently, and if someone comes in the room, I jump out of my skin if I'm so into this sort of
because you're in. It's like you say, you're in a trance. It's otherworldly.
You forget to eat. You're sitting there in your room working, and it's suddenly it's 3 a.m, and that's because you've sort of opened this portal.
Yeah.
But I think
like
it's
that
there all the time. Yeah.
I like that phrase, opening the portal. Yeah, because that's exactly what it is. I have a harder time like composing at an instrument because I don't feel as a pianist that I have as much chops, but what I can hear in my head, once I have it in my head, then I can work it out. Because if I write on piano, I'm limited by what I'm able to play.
Oh, we all are too. I agree with that. Yeah. I mean, I don't care how good you are. You're going to have your gestures that come to you. I almost always. I'm sure it's the same for you. But when I sit down to a piano, I almost always play the same thing to warm up.
I used to do a little thing with different musicians on gigs where bass player plugs in his bass and they run a lick of some sort. A drummer sits down at the drums, and when they've got everything tweaked, they run through their things. And I used to, one time with Jan Rico and LeBron, I played with LeBron. As soon as he plugged his bass in, I played the line that he always plays right with him, and he was just shocked. And same thing with Jan Rico. I knew what groove he would go to first and foremost, and and I notice that with almost every musician. They
Yep.
You
Yep.
sit down at the piano. I don't know what your thing is. I try if I'm out at a place that has a grand or something, I want to check the entire piano very quickly.
Sure.
So like I'll run some fourth cluster Dorian
Oh
stuff
yeah, yeah, yeah.
and go okay, you know.
Get your McCoy Tyner going. Yeah, I do the same thing, and I've got little, I hate to admit it, little pentatonic runs that I play.
Absolutely,
There's no shame in playing a pentatonic scale.
absolutely
If
not.
you don't play it just up and down the scale, if you do something with it.
Yeah, yeah,
But yeah, absolutely, it's funny. But so that what that means is that when I'm composing, it's the same for me. I'm going to have, whatever I've been practicing lately combined with whatever is just sort of my default, and that certainly isn't what I'm trying to do. So yeah, same for me. I end up writing stuff. Um, these days, I have my keyboard set up. I have my sequencer, and I have sheets of music paper. I have like a little easel so I can just write with my right hand. I can just dive
I
in.
do. I do the same thing. I keep
Yeah,
a small little notebook.
yeah,
The mini manuscript,
yeah, yeah.
and jot down ideas and all kinds of stuff that way.
I used to. I haven't done it in a few years. I just print them out on the inkjet, the manuscript paper. But I used to print out a sheet of manuscript paper, and then I went to the print shop and had them make like 1,000 of them. And I even had them make a little tear off notepads out of them.
Oh,
And so but there's nothing permanent about what I'm writing there. It's just incomprehensible little phrases and stuff. Sometimes it's not even notes. Sometimes I have little diagrams of things. It's all related to trying to sort of put the thoughts together.
right. And some things that only you would understand when you're looking
Right?
at
Yeah.
them.
People
Anyway.
looking at the notes that went into a particular piece, they would be like, "What the heck is that?"
So you teach composition,
I do. Yeah.
and did you not teach music production at one point or still do?
I did for a while. I'm not doing that. Well, I'm doing that in the sense that I work with kids that are college students that are using like a DAW, but I'm doing it these days from a composition teacher. But I do help them with their mix and I help them with their recording technique, from time to time. But in the old days, I taught at AIM. I did a class. I did some classes on the recording side of it. That in particular, we talked about mixing and we talked about mic technique and all that sort of stuff, and putting the tracking and all that. So yeah, I've dug into that, and I have made all my and I did also for many years have a studio that I used for as a producer. I did other people's music, a lot of it. I kind of got out of the studio business because it's nearly impossible to make any money. And if you're going to have a commercial space that actually has like rent and utilities, I don't
Oh
really
yeah.
see how you can possibly do that unless I don't know what you're doing, but for me, especially because all my friends were jazz artists, and I recorded a bunch of people's jazz albums. They were great musicians. One time, I didn't hire him, but Kenny Barron came in and recorded. We had
Oh,
they
wow.
rented a Steinway D, a concert grand. They brought it into my studio and brought this concert, Model D, in for Kenny to play, and he recorded a whole album. Audrey Shakir was the singer,
Oh wow.
wonderful jazz singer. I did her record. That's probably 10 years ago, but yeah. So Kenny Barron's in there, and he was very nice, by the way. He was super super cool
Were
guy.
you producing or?
I was just the tracking engineer.
Oh, okay.
Um,
Because how do you produce somebody like a Kenny Barron? Um,
I think other than just getting a nice sound and making him comfortable, no. Well, yeah, I wouldn't imagine that, but yeah, he was so nice, real humble guy. Everybody was running around fawning all over him, and I think because I didn't, I'm not because I don't
that
hire
that
him.
that is
He
a
was actually
great point. Like when I'm with an artist, a lot of times I'm a fan of their music,
hmm
and I may be a fan of theirs, but they're not there for me to be part of a fan club.
Right. Yeah. It was that becomes awkward. I mean, I certainly was very respectful, and I'm a giant, devotee of his playing.
Yeah.
But at the time, I just tried to be professional, and we actually, I thought we hit it off pretty well. He probably I don't even remembers me anymore, but we got along fine. He was very cool. But that said, I was in that business, and so I did record some stuff, and I kind of got out of that because, like I said, the upkeep of such a thing, and like I said, I was recording people's jazz albums, and of course that's if you're talking about studio time, it's just massively smaller than like a rock album. They'll spend
Yeah.
months on those things and overdubbing and do 100 takes of this and that. And jazz players often they just come in, they track, and they're done. So I'm just not really making any money because everybody's so good at what they do. And what am I going to do? Let's do another take. Make them do another one. So we're out. And then I had to admit it, but even though I was getting paid by the hour, I was always waiting for the session to be over. So I was like, wait,
Huh.
I mean, I enjoyed what I was doing, but I wasn't like, let's keep. I was like, can I go home now? So I guess maybe I'm not born to be a tracking engineer because I was just kind of wanted to get it over with, even though I wanted the music to be great. So I
And
eventually moved on.
I was never an engineer. I always had good engineers that I worked with as a producer, so that I could focus on the music and let them focus on recording the music.
Yeah,
And I find nowadays I've had to learn a little bit about engineering. Still have a long way to go on that. You
well, it
know,
keeps changing.
mixing, things like that. It's very difficult for me to do all of that, to wear all of those hats,
Of course.
and
Yeah,
I get a little. Um, there's so many what I call bedroom producers now.
most of
Uh,
it. Yeah.
yeah, and though I can appreciate the fact that you can record and do all this stuff on your own, I don't feel a lot of them have put in the time and the education to learn what they're doing, right from constructing songs. Because I mean, I've actually heard songs on the radio in two different keys,
Oh yeah, yeah. I know.
and I'm just like,
And they're not trying to be bitonal either.
no, not at all. They wouldn't even. I'm not bi, you know. Uh,
Bitonal, bicurious, bitonal.
yeah,
Curious. Yeah, it's the same thing for me. I'm sure probably like you get a little. I don't know if they were triggered by people. Producers and engineers are both terms. An engineer, I don't even like to use that for recording. Not that I don't respect the trade. Don't get me
I
wrong.
always call them knob
Engineer is
jockeys.
somebody who builds a bridge
Yeah,
somewhere, or an engineer is somebody who like designs the space shuttle. To me, a recording engineer is an important job, and I don't really know if the word engineer qualifies. And producer, I mean, to me, Quincy Jones is a producer.
yes,
David Foster. Those are producers. Tommy LiPuma. Those guys.
right.
I mean, they were the guys that made the record, and they knew more about music than the musicians that were
Well,
often.
and that's a big difference between now and then, because then as a producer you typically knew how to write the string arrangements, you knew how to write the horn arrangements, you knew what sounds were blended well. Um,
Yeah,
Now, somebody pulls up a string patch and plays three notes simultaneously and goes, "Great, I got a string pad." Um,
yeah.
and I just feel that more people, if you're really serious about your art, education should continue, your entire life.
Absolutely,
You know,
and a certain reverence for not a no, you don't want to be timid and you don't want to be self-deprecating, but on the other hand, I think a certain assumption that you don't know everything is a good thing to carry around. As
humility.
opposed to the opposite sort of narcissistic assumption that the world is going to fall at your feet and you know
Yeah.
everything. when you don't. And I'm that's probably my get off my lawn, old man
Well, and
problem.
I have a
But
little bit. I have some of that. I mean, I have a student right now who has, I won't say his name, but he has two platinum records, and he doesn't know how to play an instrument, and he's never had an original musical thought. Everything is, oh, well, I got this from this MIDI pack, and I took this from Splice, and created, a 4 bar loop. Uh, and
yeah,
and has had great success with it.
there's a lot of 4 bar songs now that have gone platinum. I mean,
Yeah,
and I'm not even saying that a 4 bar song can't be. There are some 4 bar songs that I think are awesome. I actually like. It's funny we were talking about 4 bar songs is like Up All Night from whatever they are, Daft Punk. Up
oh
All Night.
yeah, yeah,
And that one, I heard that on the radio, and I realized quickly that it was the guitar that was making, and then I realized it was Nile
not
Rodgers. And I was
yes.
like, okay, well, now, there's a guy who can write a 4 bar song,
Exactly.
and it's going to be awesome. He's just one of my heroes musically, as he should. Anybody
Yes,
who
yeah,
knows
anybody
about
that
pop.
knows anything about pop
Yeah,
guitar, and
brilliant. And what's interesting though is that I watched an interview with him, and I could tell always, but the thing I took away from the interview is that he's really smart. I had no idea what just a whip smart guy this is, and also that he, not to be snobby, but he was originally a jazz guitar player.
yeah,
And he kind of had to be talked into pop music. He was
yeah,
like he wanted to be Wes Montgomery or whatever, and so he knows his harmony and he knows what he's doing. And if the songs are simple, it's because they are where they need to be, not because he ran out of ideas, or
right.
because,
And there's nothing wrong with simplicity when
right.
it's put together well. The whole time I was with Curtis Mayfield, his mantra was simplicity is the rule.
Oh yeah, and it should be. I
Because
mean,
when I first started playing with him, I was, I thought I was like some jazz guy. So I'm playing, people get ready and I'm adding these textures and things. He's like, I like what you're doing, Cap, but it doesn't work for my music,
yeah,
And I learned a great deal by having to step back and strip all the other stuff to make those chords work. So
yeah. Well, it is. Yeah, and it was his gig too, and so yeah, absolutely. You
yeah,
have to have respect for the concept that you're joining in. You're joining in their musical concept. They have their fans and they have their musical voice, and you have to.
yeah. Now he would give you a lot of freedom to do things, but he would he
Yeah,
would he would rein things back a little bit when he felt they were going too far.
right.
So how did you come to like some of the people on your list there, Dave Weckl and Scott Henderson and
Well, a lot of those jazz musicians I met through teaching at Atlanta Institute of Music. We um, would bring in clinicians. Mike Stern, though, and Mike was a friend of some friends of mine. Bill Hart, guitar player. Mike
hmm
and Bill are friends, and so Bill introduced me to Mike, and then Mike played on that first album that I wrote. He played some guitar on it, and so we got to be friends. And so it was that mostly. Scott Henderson, same thing. The very first time it was like 1980 something that school was just getting started. I was brought in. I wasn't even teaching there yet. I was just brought in to play keyboards on a little show. I think Jeff Sipe was there too. Jeff and Russ
excellent
Rogers.
drummer.
Yeah. Jeff and I were playing together all the time back then. Jeff and me and I think Russ Rogers or whatever. We
Oh yeah,
backed up Scott on his little concert clinic / concert, mostly playing. He talked at the end, and so I got to know Scott, and then just kind of went on like that. We had when the school was a little bigger. I reached out. I went to a Yellow Jackets show, and I just walked over to Jimmy Haslett and said, "Hey, I teach at this music school. How would you guys feel about coming over here, and giving a class?" And he's like, we've gotten to be really good friends now. It's been like 20 years ago, and he was like, "Oh, sure, yeah, let's do it." He's the nicest guy you'll ever meet, and
He's a label mate as well.
he is, yeah, yeah. That's actually, if I dare to say it, that was my doing. Actually,
Yeah, no,
I introduced him to Joseph.
yes, I had an interview with Joseph several weeks ago, and we talked about that.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm proud to have been a facilitator of that relationship because I think it's working for both of them. But
Yeah.
anyway, so Jimmy came. They came to the Jackets came to the school and played, and Robin Ford. Actually, Robin Ford had come to the school to come to AIM before, and I played with him too. But clinic. I tried not to put people I played only on a clinic with on my list, but I think there might be a couple of them if I played a couple times and it was actually a real concert. But uh, Robin Ford came, and then the Yellow Jackets came and played, and then we had several Yellow Jackets concerts through AIM, and then
How did you feel? Because I know if I was doing something and like I had to play with Dave Weckl or Jimmy Haslip, um, I would be I would just be too nervous. I'd probably sub the gig out to you.
ah well, I mean, I have that same problem. There was one clinic um, that came was a guitar player who was I want to call him a rockabilly, but he's a virtuoso. Um, I guess sort of Western swing blues guy named Johnny Highland, and he plays. I mean, he's just like a bionic um, blues, sort of country blues guy. I mean, his playing is just phenomenal. It's hard to equate him with anybody. But it's like Nashville virtuosity style. And
Hmm.
anyway, he came in and did these. They were all three-chord blueses, but it was all just acrobatically amazing. And I was like really nervous there because I mean the honky tonk piano thing is not my thing at all.
Right.
And he was always like, that was great. He always asked me for me to come and play with him the next time he would come in, and he's a monster. But I was always like, man, this is not me. I don't know what to do here. I hope it was okay. But same thing. I was nervous with all these guys. Absolutely. I just did the best I can. But there were a few times that I was like, this is
A little surreal.
yeah, yeah. I guess what you do is you just close your eyes and go. And um, uh, at one time Peter Erskine came to the school, and
Mm,
another just a hero when he came to the school,
yeah.
and he'd never met me before, and we played together. And I said, hey, what if we did "Oops" from Steps Ahead, which is this dun, 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 dun,
Yeah.
dun. It has this part where he plays the drums in 5, 1 2 1 2 3 1 2 1 2 3 1 2 1 2 3 1 2 1, and then meanwhile the band is in 4/4, and nobody else in the group had any idea what song it was, so just me and Peter Erskine played "Oops" in front of a bunch of people
Wow.
with no rehearsal, and I almost screwed up, but I didn't, but it was what was interesting about that is that at least in his case, his playing is so musical and supportive and effortless. We were playing some jazz tunes with like a quartet earlier, and I almost forgot who I was playing with because his playing was so what it should be. He's
Right.
such a great drummer. In essentially, he's coming in as the star of this clinic, this show, this little concert, and meanwhile he's being a perfect accompanist to all of us unknown guys that are playing with him. It was, and so one of the things I've discovered at least is that the really great musicians, a lot of times, they're easier to play with.
Yeah,
And
they're not there to impress anyone. Um,
right, well, it's that, and I think it's just
and,
that they're so good at what they do
right.
that you can
It's just
forget.
their
Yeah,
DNA.
yeah. The
Yeah.
music takes over, and the people disappear, and the music takes over, and then you're just playing with a fellow musician, and you can forget for a minute that this is like a legendary cat. So that was my experience with playing with Peter Erskine was this that he was just the music made me forget where I was, which was otherwise I was going to freeze up because he's Peter Erskine.
On one of the Curtis tours, we had finished up in London, and we were still going to be in Europe a few more days. And David Sanborn was in town, and Ricky Peterson couldn't do the gig.
Wow.
Now, the group I had here at the time, Ice Nine, we used to do a ton of David Sanborn. So Sanborn asked me if I would do this gig.
Wow.
And, there's that part of me going, hell yeah, let's do it. And then I'm looking on stage and I'm set up sideways on the stage. I'm facing stage left. Sanborn's in front. Hiram Bullock is to his right. Marcus Miller is to his left. And Terry Lynn Carrington is playing drums with Don Elias on percussion. And I'm just going, what
Nobody
the hell?
good, right? Just
I know, a bunch of slouches. And I'm like, what the hell am I doing here? They were doing one song, and it was going on forever. And I guess I was starting to kind of, I won't say lose it. I just was kind of I was out of the moment at that point. I was just going through the motions. And Terry Lynn Carrington's back there, and she's sensing this, and she looks at me and she's like, play, motherfucker, play. And I'm like, oh, okay. And so I had to get back. And then, of course, you've got Hiram Bullock back in his day where he would hop around on stage and he's in your face. And then Marcus just being phenomenal. And
that would be an out of body experience for sure.
It started out that after a while it just turned into a gig. It was like, oh, we're gonna do Lotus Blossom now. Okay, yeah, I know that. And so it was cool.
Rehearse?
No.
Oh wow.
No, there was no
you
time.
Just dumped out. Where was this at?
This was at a little club in outside of London, in London, in Camden Town, called Dingwalls.
Wow.
And it was basically kind of like a little hole in the wall, but I mean the amount of people they would pack in there was just.
Sure.
And
those are the best gigs in those kind of joints.
Yeah, I was telling another friend of mine about a gig we did in Paris at Morning Sun or Morning Star, New Morning. That's what it was, the New Morning. And the audience is so close that somebody at the table next to me could lean over and play the upper and lower parts of my piano.
Yeah.
And those are a little intimidating when it's that close.
You can literally smell the crowd. Right?
Yes. Ode to funk. So
they can smell you, one or the other, right?
Yeah. So what's in your near future here?
Well, pandemic has made a big difference in my work schedule. I'm very busy teaching basically now. I mean, I have lots of students privately, and then I have 2 different college gigs, part-time college gigs that are going on, and then I'm playing my little gigs and just playing, gigs for pay and.
Gigs starting to come back a little more now for you?
Yeah, I've been very busy. As a matter of fact, I've been busy enough that I haven't been. I wrote last year. I think my latest sort of compositional stuff, other than for hire, has been that I wrote some orchestra with jazz music. I was inspired by the Metropole concept, Metropole orchestra concept, to write some music. And then one of my at the college, LaGrange College, my person who hired me, Lee Johnson, a great classical composer. He's the guy that hired me. He said, you should write a piece and we'll record it. Of course, what happened was that they didn't really have the money to record it, but it was very cool to be inspired to write a piece, an orchestra piece, because they would hire an orchestra once a year to read through everybody's pieces. And what happened, of course, was that they ran out of time running the student pieces, so I couldn't put myself in front of the students. But I ended up writing a 3-movement sort of concerto for jazz piano, trio, or quartet rather. It's soprano, saxophone, piano, and rhythm section with the chamber orchestra in it, and the goal was to have some groove to it, but also not a pop music feel, rhythm. I guess you can dip into like the world beat sound, and then you can dip into Latin rhythms. Again, it goes back to Vince Mendoza and some of those people who have written that kind of music. And I wrote a chamber music with jazz, but it's not really jazz. I mean, there's improvisation, but it's definitely not. I'm avoiding the 2-5-1 harmony on it.
Yeah.
It doesn't sound. The harmonic concept is a modernistic one, but it still has groove. So I was working on that, and I finished that piece. But of course, right now it exists as a MIDI demo and a score. I did the MIDI demo, and actually I was talking to Jimmy Haslip about that, and he says that he has connections with orchestras over in the Czech Republic and Eastern Europe that'll record the stuff. You can literally Zoom along with them, and they'll do your piece. You get a conductor, and it's very affordable. So I may work on that. Of course, I have to pay for it, but I'm sort of messing around with what they used to call third stream music. Gunter Schuller,
Oh yeah.
messing around with trying to write stuff that's blends the classical aesthetic with the harmony and the modern jazz harmony, which is nothing new either. I'm trying to. I mean, there's people been doing that for decades, but it was just my particular twist on it, my particular harmonic ideas.
Right. Who were some of your influences classically?
Well, I'm a big Stravinsky fan. I mean, I love from Bach. I love Bach. I mean, I was always amazed how advanced his harmony was for writing in the 1700s, early 1700s. That he was able to some of the twists and turns in his pieces are like, man. I mean, I don't think there's ever been a greater musician in the world.
And I always tell people, if when they talk about chord progressions and things like that, oh, that's a strange. If Bach didn't write it, it doesn't exist.
Yeah, he went everywhere, and it was amazing how he got. Of course, there's stories of him getting chastised by his church that he worked for
Exactly.
confusing the singers, and this is in other words, he was writing over their heads, and they didn't like it, and little did they realize that in 400 years he would be the
Yeah.
but yeah, Bach was I love his music, and like I said, I'm a big fan of Stravinsky, and I like Bartok, and I'm a fan of the American school, Samuel Barber and
Copeland.
Exactly. Aaron Copland and Leonard Bernstein,
Mm-hmm.
all those guys. I thought they were kind of pushing the envelope, but being tonal about it, as opposed to the Schoenberg atonality, which I love too. It's amazing. I teach people about atonal music and serialism, and we look at Schoenberg and he was such a dry, kind of grumpy looking guy, and I also studied from his counterpoint book, which is awful. I mean, it's awful in the sense that it's condescending, and the student will not understand this for many years. It's kind of like that, you're an idiot, and I'm not, and, even though he was a genius. But what's interesting though is that when I listen to the Schoenberg pieces, they're really quite beautiful. Despite the intellectualism and what was clearly not the most charming personality of all, his music is quite beautiful. It can bring you to tears, which is interesting in its atonal way. So I even dip into that. I try to find little bits of that. I like Tchaikovsky and the late Romantics, although I'm not as big of a fan of Romanticism. Chopin, and I love it all. I mean, I love the music, but I'm not as influenced by the Chopin period.
What about the Impressionist?
Oh yeah, and Debussy, and Ravel. Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad you mentioned that because I don't know why didn't go immediately there. Debussy.
I think because the Impressionists seeped so much into the jazz culture as well.
Oh yeah, absolutely. They were jazz musicians in a sense
They
that
were. I mean, you
yeah.
play some of those JBC pieces, and you're just like, oh man, it's sharp 11s, and
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
the
harmony,
harmony just it was like no,
non-functional
yeah,
harmony. At least that's where, at least in my where non-functional harmony, meaning that there's chords, but they are not restricted to a tonal center per se or a key signature. I mean,
right,
it's chromaticism, but it's chromaticism with consonant colors. Um, that approach is very dear to my heart as a composer. You
hmm,
know, to manipulate the traditional chord colors in a way, in an unexpected way, basically,
yeah.
is a powerful part of you know, my influence anyway.
So one last question for you: what kind of and I feel this would be good for you since you teach as well. What's your advice to a student or someone who is not a student but is into music and wants to pursue it?
Oh, well, those are it's a wonderful open a blank page there. I would say first of all, last night I was playing I play a weekly jam session, and this for better or worse, the bass player wasn't there. I think there was a
Where do you
miscommunication
do this at?
at the Velvet Note in Alpharetta.
Oh, okay, that's what
I
I
play there
thought.
every Thursday. We do an open mic jam session. You know, it's open mic, but you know, obviously, you know, we everybody just gets a little time. We don't just let it go.
And
We have some great
the
jazz musicians.
autopsy club have
Right, exactly. We have some occasionally have some jazz musicians. Quite often have some jazz musicians come in and join us. But then we also have people that are just getting started. But anyway, somehow there was a miscommunication, and we didn't have a bass player. So there was a kid in there. I want to say kid. He was in his 20s, but
as a kid.
yeah, yeah. To us, he is. And he like knew three jazz songs, and he was into jazz. He knew Footprints and So What, and you know, something else. Red Clay or something. And you know, just sort of what you would consider new to the jazz genre tunes to know, right? He didn't know
Right.
what. But anyway, and he couldn't read that good. He could read okay. He was getting through it, but he wasn't. Actually, I could tell he could read, but he was getting lost because of the pressure on him. But anyway, this kid came in and he was just going to sit in, and he ended up playing pretty much the whole gig, and and he did great. And I praised him because I think he really stepped up. And as a young guy, and he'd never done it. But anyway, um, what occurred to me, which I've said a lot, is that education, we talk about education being great, and it is great, but the particular thing that matters more than anything else is to play, and play. The more you play with people that can tell where you are, that you're not pulling one over on. In other words, if you play in a band and it's a garage band and everybody sucks and they're all into you because you can
Right. I
play at a
always say
faster
play
scale.
with people who are better than you.
Oh yeah, absolutely. More experienced, even if they're not technically superior to you, that they just know what music's about. They might not even be particularly virtuosic, but they've just been in there. They've been in the real world.
Right.
They played gigs and they've made their living, and they know how to do a gig right. So you play with those people, and and then you do it more and more, and that's really the most important thing. You can spend a lot of time, and you should practice. Everybody should practice a lot, but you should not practice without. I mean, you should gig. You should get out there and play all the time. The more playing you do, the more you're going to understand what music is made for, and how because that hypothetical thing of sitting around, that'll just eat you up. You can't do that. You got to play. You got to perform, and I mean, because that's what it's for. If nobody hears it, then what's the point?
Yes,
Um,
and I'm always a big fan of the communication aspect with the audience, not just through your music though. Because I find like, especially like if you are doing jazz, most people don't really know the language. They appreciate aspects of it, but they don't really understand it. And if you kind of can bring them into it,
yeah, yeah, absolutely. And there's ways you do that with your playing. Sometimes it's just if you can play a phrase that catches. It doesn't have to be something they've heard before. It doesn't have to be something flashy. Even what it can be is just something engaging. You play something, and eyes all it's just
yeah,
because you played something that you really intended, and that it had you made a statement. And if you make a statement, then people will notice. And so yeah, you don't do that when you're practicing. I mean, you can't. And you should practice. On the other hand, you should practice without anybody listening. It should be the exact opposite. You should practice with nobody listening, because otherwise, then you're performing, and you've already that's what performing is for. You should
Right.
practice and just feel free to suck as bad as you have to get to the next level. And if you know somebody's digging on it, or listening to it and going, what's the matter with him? I thought that for example, if I'm going to practice. What if I'm playing something and it just sounds horrible? What if I thought that guy could play? Aren't you a professional? What are you doing noodling around with this garbage? So I really believe that those two ends of
So
the
you've
scale.
been to one of my gigs.
I practice like nobody's listening, and then perform with 100% engagement. Another thing is that one of the things that happens on a gig or a concert or any kind of performance is the establishment of the flow state, which we talk about improvising. Oscar Peterson talked about the only time he felt truly content and happy was when the music was 100% in, and what he was doing, he was 100% engaged in the music and nothing else. Which Abraham Maslow talked about peak experience and the hierarchy of human needs. Self-actualization, meaning you're right there, now.
In that moment, yes.
In that moment. And that really, a gig, a performance, especially with fellow travelers that, are supportive, is just, it's beyond ecstatic. But you don't do that. You're not going to get that practicing by yourself. I mean, and you should practice by yourself. Don't get me wrong. You just didn't have that expectation of the practice.
I never used the word practice.
What's that?
I never used the word practice.
Oh, yeah.
It always sounds like it's there's a chore involved. So
I suppose.
So I always tell my students, I don't say how much did you practice this week. I was like, did you get the chance to spend any time with the piano?
Well, yeah. Or what did you work on? Of course, that has a word, work on.
Yeah, I just try and avoid all those little triggers that.
Sure. And as far as a composer, as far as composing music, Mike Stern says this to everybody. I know this because I've talked to many people. He said it to me. He said it to everybody else that he ever talks to, and I hear it from other people saying it. He says, finish every piece that you start. You should always finish them, because even if it sucks, I think you should finish your pieces. I tell all my students, all right, well, finish this thing. Well, I'm not all that into it. Well, you're going to create a pattern of abandonment. You're going to create a habit of hitting. You hit a bump in the road, and you stop. And it really is human nature to try to conserve our energy, conserve our resources. Why work harder? And so, and then I also, if you're discouraged, if you think that you suck, put that out of your mind. I mean, or don't put it out of your mind. Just keep going anyway. Just don't ignore that, because I guarantee, every time I sit down to write something, I think I'm an idiot and I suck and I have no ideas. That I think is what happens when anybody tries to write, because you're confronted with the universe in front of you. So just focus on keep moving. Just keep moving. Keep doing something. Do something. Come up with something else. You don't like this? Do something else. This is a dead end. Then find another thing and keep going. And whatever it takes to get your momentum going is more important than finding the perfect thing or doing an incredible thing. Just do something and keep going. You really can't tell where greatness will come in, so you can't be filtering for greatness. You can't, this isn't great enough, I'm not going to do it. Just do the thing the best you can and let later on decide whether it's good or not. Because, you can take some of the greatest music ever composed and created and recorded and listen to it. When you take it apart, it's not that much there. I mean, it could be great, but it's not like there's some secret golden chord that they all use that nobody else.
Exactly.
Something in there that's, made out of butterfly wings or whatever it is. It's just craft. And so, like you described craft, you just keep going and write a tune, and then also be advised that there's every composer writes better and worse music. In other words, sometimes you're going to have your less than stellar compositions, and some people record them and some people don't.
Right.
There's plenty of recordings of great musicians I had another thing about performing. I was going to say, I got from Russell Ferrante. He told me this specifically. He said he had a student, or not a student, but a friend who, I'm passing this on. I hope I get it right. But he said that this guy had studied the live performances of the great Miles Davis quintet.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know which one, but several of them. And he said that they screwed up all over the place live. There were plenty of times where people missed a bridge, or they left out a bar, or they did something weird that on a jazz gig everybody spin around and look at you like, what's the matter with you?
Right.
You idiot. And it turns out that pretty much the defining groups that we all hold up as the standard, they were just doing the same thing we are, and now and then they just screwed up, and nobody noticed. The only reason this guy noticed is that he actually sat down and counted through all these things and charted them out. Look at this, Wayne Shorter played a half a chorus here, or whatever, or somebody played a clam on this, and in other words, it really was just regular people. So
that's the human element.
Yeah, and so just write a piece, play. Don't worry about it. Just play, but play as much as you possibly can. Play all the time. Have your hands on your instrument all the time.
And I would say also, and this applies to playing as well, but I think as a composer, listening to as much music as you possibly can, and get out of your comfort zone.
Agreed. Yeah.
Like some people, even if you're a songwriter, just because you dig Ariana Grande doesn't mean you shouldn't go back and listen to Gershwin.
Yeah.
Because
one of the things for me about having been a working musician, just playing cover gigs, weddings, all that stuff. Excuse me. Just goofy little wedding gigs, is that I've had to play all these songs.
Yeah.
I know all these songs from every era. I wouldn't have sat down and transcribed every one of these songs, but because I had to play them on a gig, you get an intuitive sense for how music is put together, from a jazz standard to a country song to
exactly
whatever it may be. The song forms, the patterns people play, the way that the instruments fit together, the soloing style, the harmonic style, all that stuff is you just got to play and listen to music and learn a bunch of music, and that really makes that's there's no other way around it. There's no way to put that in your pill, or go to a class and learn. I mean, all the class might do is help you know what to look for,
right.
Or recognize things that help you recognize them, or whatever, or tell you what to practice. But it's still going to be you in your room, just with some recordings, or you in your car listening on the way to the gig, or whatever it may be. Just have music going all the time. I agree with you.
Yeah, and I'm sure you went through the days of putting on the 33 RPM record and moving it down to 16 so you could pick out that solo. And
our music history class in school, in college, was literally drop the needle. We used to call it the drop the needle test, because you'd have to listen to a piece, and then you'd have to identify it on a test, which piece is this, and he would say,
I had to do the same thing.
Yeah, everybody knows, they know, at the beginning,
right,
of the movement. So, we had dropped the needle. I had a cassette machine that I modified to have a speed control. I took it apart and put a speed control into it because it didn't have one.
You're also quite the technological. I don't know. No, I remember you used to tune my Rhodes.
That's how we met, as a matter of fact, if I recall. I came over to your house and
really? Is that how we met?
First time I ever met you. I had this Strobo tuner, and I was trying to get my money out of that Strobo tuner.
I'm glad I could contribute.
Yeah, Vance Taylor, I used to tune his piano too.
Who were you? Were you in a particular group back then, or?
I was playing with. Well, first I was playing with that hotel band with Randy Brown in it, called Zynga, I think was her name.
Oh yeah. Oh, I must have taken your place.
Oh yeah. And then I was playing with this band called the Tall Dogs. It was
okay. I thought you were with Tall Dogs.
Yeah, I was.
Were you pre Eubanks or
No,
post?
I was after him. He was really the mastermind of that band. It was kind of a strange gig. It would be like replacing Zawinul in Weather Report, because he was the guy that kind of wrote all the songs. And
Right.
it ended up being the band didn't last much longer. Not because I think mostly because of they changed the drinking age, and so all our gigs dried up. College students couldn't go to the bars anymore. So,
Yeah.
yeah, it was like a jazz fusion band. JMO from the Allman Brothers was in the band, and
Hmm.
it was a great band. The guys from Sea Level were the rhythm section. So it was kind of a fun gig. It was like a cool sort of.
Yeah, that's where I remember where I would see you because back then there was the Atlanta music scene was pretty good for live music
It was
and
great. Yeah,
and for original music. I
we were
mean,
playing all originals except for a few cool versions of our own of covers that were
and
custom.
and we were doing the same. I mean,
We
that
made a
was
living. Yeah.
because if there were certain clubs in town, like we used to call the Nacho Circuit,
Yep.
Carlos McGee's, where you were required to play X amount of original material,
Oh
and
yeah. Yeah.
and who does that now? you know?
Well, I think you're prohibited from playing any amount of original material in most of those kind of gigs now.
Yeah,
It-
I,
it-
I
it's,
remember
it's,
doing a gig in Opp, Alabama, and every time we'd play an instrumental song, they would say, "Y'all don't play that classical music. We don't.
is
We
that
don't."
that you wrote the op bop for that, right?
Yeah. Wow, good
I actually
memory.
remember that just because it was a great title. Like,
So, well, I know you've got to run because I know you've got to teach in a few,
I do.
and I appreciate you doing this and spending some time.
My
It's
pleasure. That's
always
great.
great to see you,
You too.
and you know, we'll continue our bantering back and forth.
Yes, sir. Yeah. If you want to do
Y-
this again, let me know. It was my pleasure.
Yeah, great conversation. I think I learned a lot, and hopefully everybody else did as well.
Awesome. My
All
pleasure.
right, all right. Well, thank you, Randy.
Thank you, sir. Have a good
Enjoy
one.
you too. Enjoy your day.
Thanks. Bye bye.
Bye.